the Muslim Ummah. And each day that goes by, the harder we try. In gratitude we pray to Allah. Chosen as part of the best of mankind, we spread the word of Islam. Every difficulty faced in our lives makes us realize that it's just part of Allah's plan. Feeling stronger, we take it in our stride.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome back to our 10th episode of this exciting journey that we started some time ago through our history, the Islamic history on this planet. And mashallah, I'm sure that we have seen already how great our deen has greatly affected other people, how fast people accepted Islam within no time, and how easily it could spread throughout the world. Especially we have seen Asia. We have been looking into Africa, and still this episode is going to actually still be busy with Africa, simply because I find it extremely important as we discussed Asia, which obviously is the continent with the majority of Muslims, Muslim population on this planet. Africa plays a second role after Asia, of course, and more than a quarter of the world's Muslims live in Africa. More than a quarter. Now again, this of course is already reason enough to be busy with the history of Africa. And many of us, we have to admit, at schools or nowadays as adults, I'm sure that many of us don't even know that much about this continent and don't even know that much about the empires in that part of the world, and that most of the empires actually there were Islamic empires. Most of the empires in Africa were Muslim empires, and most of them developed due to Islam. Most of them became so important on the continent that Islam spread in such a way that people actually consider Africa the Islamic continent. Of course, things changed with the influence of the Europeans and the colonialists during the time of colonialism, when especially the Western Europeans, the British, the French, the Dutch, the Belgians and so on, when they arrived in Africa, colonized Africa not only, but colonized Africa for its wealth, because Africa is actually the richest continent on this planet. Despite the population being the poorest on this planet, the countries with their wealth, whatever is under the ground, is extremely rich. So the contrast in itself is amazing. The contrast on this continent is amazing. And whoever has been to Africa will understand very well what I'm saying and what I mean, because you will see how different societies in Africa act in comparison to, for example, Europe or Asia. Islam has, if you look at this perspective, of course, in this perspective, you will see that Islam has also influenced African societies in many ways. We have, again, like in Asia and Africa, also different branches of Islam, especially the Sufi branches of Islam, that have developed in such a way that in certain countries, Islam means Sufism. And many people don't understand the difference between the pure Tawheed, the pure Islam, and the Islam of Sufism or of the Sufis. Unfortunately, this is something that still is very deep in certain societies in Africa. If you look to West Africa, for example, Sufism is equals to Islam, like in Senegal or in the Gambia. You will find basically people practicing Muslims would rather be practicing Sufis. In many parts of the world, it is like this, unfortunately, but Africa plays an important role. You will find quite a big Sufi movement in West Africa, quite a big one in North Africa in certain countries, and in East Africa as well. The way that Islam spread, as we said already in the last episode, was basically going from the Arab traders who brought Islam into the Swahili coast, as we said already, into the island of Zanzibar, for example, over to the mainland, nowadays Tanzania, Kenya, Uganda, and so on, into Central Africa. From North Africa, the trade that was happening between North African traders and West African, there was no bloodshed at all. West Africans accepted Islam due to their trade, again, like the Asians, like a lot of Asians that we discussed already before. And we should not forget West Africa, strongest and most populated area and biggest Muslim country, of course, Nigeria. Nigeria, such a massive country, mainly Muslim populated, and there again you will see what I mentioned before already in the last episode, that there is a kind of battle, a kind of fight between the two religions, between Islam and Christianity, especially in Africa. You will see it in Nigeria, you will see it in other massive countries, you will see it even in South Africa. South Africa is not a country where Islam went due to trade, actually, in such a way, especially not during the time that Islam was spreading in Africa. It didn't really have the chance to go all the way down to the southern part of Africa at that time. And we will speak about South Africa in another part, simply because there is no historical indigenous type of Islam in South Africa. But South Africa accepted a lot of immigrants, a lot of Asian immigrants that settled in South Africa, and the ones who basically spread Islam within South Africa, even between the black community. We'll come back to that, inshallah. Now, first of all, we're looking at West, North, and East Africa, where Islam spread on its natural way, and in a way that, as we said before, no Arab and no Muslim from outside went to colonize any part of Africa. Nowhere. There is no proof for whatever, something like that. Whereas we know from the Europeans that one of the first things that they did, they settled in certain parts of Africa, and they basically took parts of Africa over, stole countries in Africa, and in the end became their colonies. Whole of Africa was colonized by the 19th century, the whole of Africa. The incredible situation of the spread of Islam in Africa is so big, actually, that Europeans, when they went to Africa and they settled there in colonies that they started establishing, they could not believe that they got rid of the Muslims in Europe, and now they go to Africa and they go to Asia and they find them there again. So they thought that because of getting rid of the Muslims from Europe, they thought that that's it, we don't have to deal with them anymore. But wherever they went, they encountered Muslims, and wherever they went, they heard adhan. Wherever they went, they saw masajid, mosques. Now, we have an interesting, if you look throughout history, you will always find within the colonialists' ties, you will find people like British people, French people, Dutch people who have accepted Islam. You will find people who have gone to their colonies, like Dutch people have gone to Indonesia, British people, French people have gone to Africa, certain Muslim African countries, and they just simply heard adhan and got interested in this Islam thing. And alhamdulillah, many of them ended up being Muslims. And we have a lot of stories like that from earlier times than just the 20th and 21st century. We're not talking about early conversions, we're talking about that time, long time ago. British, French, Germans, Dutch, who actually accepted Islam during that time because they came in contact with it, and not in their home countries, but in Africa or even in Asia. So this is something that makes us actually should make us quite proud. But this can just make us proud if we know that. And that's exactly what we're doing with these episodes. We're trying to get through to people to understand how important history is and how important knowledge about this one is. We will speak about it, go on further after the break. Inshallah, I see you after the break. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
We are the Muslim Ummah, and each day that goes by, the harder we try. In gratitude we pray to Allah.
Welcome to Tech Talk. I'm your host, Omar Shear. This season of Tech Talk, we will focus specifically on the internet.
A student would type their paper, and instead of handing me a hard copy of their paper, they would upload it to this learning system, this e-learning system.
I have some great experience when it comes to technology, and in particular, internet technology. Call to action is something that we do in our day-to-day lives, and maybe we don't realize it. Now we want to discuss, after you have a product and you have a website and you have a way to communicate with your customers, which would be your email marketing system, now it's time to take the money from the customer.
We are the Muslim Ummah, and each day that goes by, the harder we try. In gratitude we pray to Allah.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome back after this short break. Now, this second episode about Africa is something which I find extremely important, simply because we have seen that Islam did not spread in Africa because of any kind of wars or any kind of colonies that were established by the Arabs or whatever. No. We have seen that Islam spread in Africa quite peacefully, and that the Africans accepted Islam because they saw, mashallah, that it is the truth. They saw that it's Allah's deen. We've spoken about East Africa, the way it spread, and from East Africa it went into Central Africa, centralized regions of Africa, and from North Africa to West Africa. The southern part of Africa, like nowadays countries like South Africa, Botswana, Zimbabwe, Zambia, Namibia, these countries did not have a direct effect by the expansion of the Muslims. They did not really go as far as Southern Africa. They mainly affected countries like nowadays in West Africa, Nigeria, Niger, Burkina Faso in West Africa, in East Africa, Kenya, Tanzania, and so on and so on. So there are the southern African countries which were not affected by the spread of Islam within Africa. And we will speak about southern Africa, inshallah, in the future, because there basically the spread of Islam in the southern part of Africa was not due to Islam being accepted by Africans. No, it came to Southern African societies from outside, from immigration. It came from Asian immigration. In the middle of the 11th century, the Kanem Empire, whose influence extended into Sudan, converted to Islam. So we see basically empires, whole empires, the rulers of these empires accepted Islam, whole empires became Muslim. This empire, the Kanem Empire, went even into Sudan. Okay, and we should not forget that the area of Sudan, Ethiopia, Eritrea, the whole eastern, from northeast, East Africa, we should see that the Christians had a big influence in there, as well as the Christians and Christianity had in North Africa. But as we know, the Byzantine Empire in North Africa did not last long and was fought back by the Muslims pretty quickly. And Morocco, Tunisia, Algeria, Egypt, and Libya were won for Islam within no time. The kingdoms in Yoruba land in West Africa claim about early arrival of Islam in the southwest of Nigeria. Now, the Yoruba land, where nowadays basically in Nigeria, you will find that many kingdoms and many empires there were Muslim empires, and this is something that we at school don't learn basically. If you think of how many empires do you know in Africa? What do you really know about African empires and African kingdoms and African rulers? Not really that much, do you? So we learn about European history, we learn about Asian history, even the Middle East, but we don't really learn that much about Africa, simply because, as I said before, most of the empires were Islamic. And it did actually affect the Europeans when they went there. They were quite upset when they arrived in Africa and saw, again, Muslims fighting them. Now, we know that North Africa was opened within no time during the time of the Umayyad Caliphate, as we said, the Umayyad Caliphate up to 750. And Christianity was basically lost in North Africa. Now, the Wadai Empire and the Kingdom of Kano embraced Islam very quickly in West Africa in the 16th century. It's amazing to know, we spoke until now, until maybe the 11th, 12th century. That's all we discussed. That was all before colonialism. But now we're talking about the 16th century. Now, not yet time for the colonialists to come, but slowly that means the Spaniards and the Portuguese have gone out already to America. They're starting discovering Africa for themselves. And still in the 16th century, there are empires that accept Islam pretty quickly. Even towards the 18th century, the Nigeria-based Sokoto Caliphate, led by Usman Dan Fodio, was the one that helped spread the spread of Islam within West Africa even further than West Africa. The 18th century, that means that was the time already when the colonies had started already and where the Europeans had gone already into Africa and had established had started to establish their settlements already. After this ones, they became colonies, basically. Now, amazing the power of Islam, all these centuries throughout, from the beginning of Islam, from the 7th century until the 18th century, it was spreading still throughout Africa, throughout the empires of Africa, and there was no stop to it. There was no stop to it, mashallah. It's amazing. Unbelievable, and that's why it's very hard to believe certain statistics that talk about Africa having more Christians than Muslims. But again, is it important to us? Is it important if there are 250 million Christians or 350 million Muslims or 500 million Muslims in Africa? The numbers don't count. Numbers are not important at all. As I said, there are no clear data. There is nothing about it. Some of them say the majority of the population in Africa are Christians. Some of them say that they are Muslims. Now, it is not important at all. What is important is to see the way that Islam spread in Africa, the way that Islam stayed in Africa, the way that Islam plays in societies, in African societies. It plays a much more important role than Christianity plays. It is closer to the Africans' understanding of the world than Christianity is, and not only the Africans' understanding, of course. It's human nature, because it is our nature. It is our fitrah. So it is obviously something that is closer to our understanding of what's happening around us than the understanding of certain man-made religions. So in that way, we see that it is no miracle. It's no miracle that Islam spread in such a way in certain parts of the world, in Africa and in Asia especially. We spoke a little bit about Nigeria before, and Nigeria has to be mentioned simply because it is a very important country in Africa, in West Africa especially, and it plays an important role. Now, the parts of Africa have specific areas that are controlled economically and politically by certain countries. Nigeria is such a country in West Africa. It plays an important economic and political role in West Africa, as well as South Africa. The country of South Africa plays a role in Southern Africa and influences the rest of the countries in Southern Africa. In East Africa, we have countries like, I would rather say, Kenya. Kenya is an important country in East Africa where we have a big Muslim minority and where Islam is seen as a threat to Christianity, believe it or not. As we mentioned before, there are countries in Africa that definitely fight Islam simply because it's becoming too much for them. Conversion is on a daily basis going on there. In 1999, the country of Nigeria, not the whole country, the northern states of Nigeria adopted the Sharia penal code. And there was a massive uproar, not only in Nigeria, but also in Europe. People were saying, what is that now, Sharia? We're going to implement Sharia in Africa. Africans are known for being tolerant. Africans are known for being lax, actually, in that way. Sharia is not fitting to Africa and definitely not Nigeria. Now, the northern parts of Nigeria have accepted Sharia. most of Muslims in Muslim African societies decide to join an order, a tariqat, which is a Sufi order, and this has spread widely throughout Africa. In West Africa, for example, there are countries like Senegal, the Gambia, Nigeria, and other countries where the Sufi way of understanding of Islam has gone deeply into, and everybody who practices Islam is automatically a Sufi, and every Sufi is automatically a fanatic Muslim. So we have to be able to distinguish between these two, and we have to see again how important it is, what it means actually to practice Islam properly. If we look into the role of Islam as ideology in Africa, as an important way of life rather than just a religion, then we can see that some of the practice of Islam, some of the African Muslims follow certain spiritual guides, or marabouts as they call them, or according to their understanding of people who can do magic, or people who have in a way mixed up African traditional religions with Islam. And sometimes you see them rather taking advice from a marabout, rather taking advice from an African tribal leader or African tribal religious person than from a Muslim, somebody who knows more about Islam, somebody who's closer to the deen than these people. But that is not something that is restricted to Africa. This is something that happens also in Asia. This is something that happens also in other parts of the world. And as long as we don't understand Islam as the way it should be, as it should be understood, that is the danger that we can see, that we go back to our traditional understanding of certain things, the way we were raised by our parents, for example, or the way that we think we understand the surrounding, instead of taking Islamic principles and understand the surrounding and what's happening around us, instead of getting knowledge, ilm, through Islam and finding out about what Islam says about certain things. That is the reason also why many of these Sufi orders are gaining so much popularity in Africa, because their knowledge, unfortunately, of Islam is not very widespread. Many people, not only in Africa, but many people are Muslims simply because their parents are Muslims. All right? Now, if I ask you now, why are you Muslim? The first answer would be, well, because my father, my mother, I was born, whatever. But that's not the right answer, I would say. You're not Muslim because of your parents. You're not Muslim because you're born Muslim. You're born Muslim. You can, anytime you're born something, you can change anytime. A religion is not something that is stuck to you, okay, like your color of your skin. That's something you can't change. But a religion you can change. If you realize that something is not right, as many of us have done, because I accepted Islam 21 years ago. So if that means that we have to get stuck to what we are without questioning it, then people like us should not exist. And we have a lot of converts, mashallah. We have a lot of people who have looked into Islam, not only in Europe, everywhere in the world, on a daily basis. And we have a lot of Muslims nowadays who are questioning things, and they have the right to question things, but then they have to be looking into the Islamic sources and the proper and correct Islamic sources. So, having said this, Africa is no exception to many other continents, to Asia or even America or other continents and countries. But in Africa, we will find, as we said already, a quarter of the world's population. We will find how important Islam, the importance of Islam in that continent, secondary just to only Asia. And with this one, I would like to close this episode. I would like to thank you for your interest. I hope that it was very beneficial. Jazakumullahu khairan. I'll see you in the next episode, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum.
We are the Muslim Ummah, and each day that goes by, the harder we try. In gratitude we pray to Allah. Chosen as part of the best of mankind, we spread the word of Islam. Every difficulty faced in our life makes us realize that it's just part of Allah's plan. Feeling stronger, we take it in our stride. We are the Muslim Ummah, and each day that goes by, the harder we try. In gratitude we pray to Allah. Chosen as part of the best of mankind, we spread the word of Islam. Every difficulty faced in our life